As Moses instructed the Israelites to tell the children their history so that the children would understand the stipulations, decrees, and laws that God had commanded his people to obey, so in future, when your children ask you what caused the split in the Evangelical Presbyterian Church, tell them these things that vividly capture the facts of the case. In spite of the happenings, there is one body, one Spirit, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God. Deuteronomy chapter 6 verse 20 and Ephesians chapter 4 verse 4 to 6. The Global Evangelical Church is an offshoot of the Bremen missionary work in the Gold Coast and Togoland. In 1847, German missionaries sailed all the way and arrived in the Gold Coast on the 5th of May. The missionaries were Lorenz Wolf, 26, Karl Flatto, 25, Louis Boltzmann, 28, and 32-year-old James Graff. The missionaries were sent to Africa to do the following: establish schools and start churches, study the customs and cultures of the people, as well as master the local languages.
When they arrived, they went to the Wesleyan missionaries, that is Methodist Church now. But the Wesleyan missionaries advised the new arrivals that they would prefer that they come to Osu and meet with the Basel missionaries. So they came down to Accra and met with Basel missionaries at Osu. And the Basel missionaries also advised that it would be better for the new missionaries to go to Everland, where no one had gone. This was pleasant news to Graff and Wolf.
Wolf and Graff followed the advice of the Basel missionaries, and Wolf set off for Everland. Wolf met a young prince from Peki, Nyangamagu, who was excited to send the missionaries to meet his father, the king of the Pekis, Togbi Kwajode Tutu V. The two decided that only Wolf should go to Peki while Graff stayed at the Christiansborg Castle at Osu.
They were joyfully received by the paramount chief, Nyankamagu's father, who was there too. And Wolf settled down with the people and started work. The chief of Peki Wudume had a very big sore, and Wolf was dressing it for him till the sore was healed. And he was also about to be baptized, as he had received the message of Christ preached to him by Wolf. But all of a sudden, he died. And it was believed that he was killed. And the natives also said it is because he was associating with the white people, the missionaries, and with the message. That's why the gods came to kill him. This dispirited Wolf so much that after his 5 years' work, he hadn't got any convert. And his health was going down, and he decided to go home.
Wolf returned to Germany to seek medical treatment but died upon arrival at the port of Hamburg in 1851. In 1852, William Double, Johannes Menge, and Friedrich Kühnus returned to continue the work left by Wolf in Peki. That same year, the missionaries were compelled to abandon the work at Peki due to the Peki-Akwamu War of 1852. They went to Keta, where they finally succeeded at baptizing 7 converts after 7 years of missionary work.
The missionaries worked hard to get converts. And after 2 years, they had 7 people. But these 7 were not the natives, but they were people from other parts of Gold Coast who were living in Keta. There were only 2 Eves among the converts, but there were 7 in all. And they were baptized. And it made the history in that the missionaries had come to the Gold Coast and had worked for 7 years before getting 7 converts. And by then, 7 missionaries also had died.
The missionaries continued their work at Adakluwaya, Anyako, Ho, Amejope, Akpafu, and Bwem, until their work of converting people from idol worship spread all over Ebeland. Several of them also yielded to the rule that governed missionary work in Africa, that is, a call of willingness to suffer and rejoice in death.
The Bremen missionaries were compelled to leave Everland as a result of the First World War that took place between 1914 and 1918. Germany was defeated by the Allied forces made up of the British and the French. Having defeated Germany, they took over German territories. And therefore, the German missionaries were considered as security threat, and they were forced to leave the territory.
The missionaries also trained some native pastors, notably Rudolf Mallet, ordained in 1882 as the first local pastor. Samuel Newell and Adolf Lawo were ordained in 1901. Andreas Aku and David Bensa were ordained in 1910. Robert Kwame and Theodore Sedude were ordained in 1911, and Elias Awoma ordained in 1912. It is generally believed that the Ewe language is one of the most developed languages and most widely spoken in Africa.
It has several dialects. Even the south alone, we have the Anglo dialect, we have the Mafi, we have the Agave. Then we go to Epadoma, we have different dialects. Ewe is spoken in Benin, in the Republic of Togo, and these are all different dialects of the Ewe language. Fortunately for us, the missionaries came with some linguists as part of their mandate to study the language and the culture of the people they were coming to. The missionaries endeavored to reduce the Ewe language, which was a spoken language, to writing. And they developed an Ewe orthograph.
Early attempts at translating the Bible into Ewe started in 1858 by a missionary called Reverend Bernhard Skledel. Other early translators were Reverend John Mears, Jacob Spieth, and Gottlob Dobbel. They completed translating the entire Bible by 1911.
By January 1916, the first printed copies of the Bible were received at Keta, and it was a celebration.
Unlike other languages, Ewe has a standard orthography used by all the Ewe dialects. It is worth noting that the translation of the Bible into Ewe was not done by the missionaries only. 5 native teachers assisted the missionaries in translating the Bible, They were Joseph Kudese, Andreas Aku, Samuel Quist, Ludwig Ajaklo, and Joseph Tosu. The last batch of missionaries left the Gold Coast in January 1914 when the First World War broke out in Europe. But Reverend Ernst Bergi was allowed to remain because he was a Swiss resident in Lomé.
He worked there until September 1921, when he had to leave because of ill health.
Before the departure of Reverend Bergi, Reverend Andreas Aku, a native of Adaklu, was elected the first moderator of the church. It was under his leadership that the first synod was held at Palime from the 19th to the 22nd of May 1922. This marked the beginning of a pure African leadership of the church.
Andreas Aku was elected as the moderator of the church, both British or the Anglophone and the Francophone.
The Second Synod in September 1923 redemarcated the church into English and French-speaking zones.
Consequently, two sets of leaders were elected for each of the zones. For the English zone or the Anglophone zone, Reverend David Bensa was elected moderator, and Reverend Robert Kwame as synod clerk. And for the Francophone zone, Reverend Andreas Aku was elected moderator with Reverend Robert Baita as the synod clerk.
The liturgy of the church was revised, and in 1931, a constitution was promulgated. It is important to note that the liturgy, the Eber Bible, and Eber Hymn Book were strong unifying factors for the church in both the English-speaking and the French-speaking parts of Eberland. The church, then known as Bremen Mission, Eber Christo Hammer and Nyanwi Hammer, came under the supervision of the Scottish Mission at the instance of the state and was renamed Eber Presbyterian Church in 1926.
The church was known by several names as it went through history. It was initially known as Bremen Mission Church because it was founded by the Bremen missionaries. Then it became known as the Hammer, as the church for Ever people. It also became known as Presbyterian Hammer. After the German missionaries left, the Scottish missionaries came to take over administration. And the Scottish practiced the Presbyterian system of governance. So when they came, they discovered that lay leadership in the church had a lot of giftings which they could use. So they introduced the Presbyterian system into church administration. So by that, the church took the name of Presbyterian Hammer. In 1903, the Basel missionaries, who were the founders of the Presbyterian Church of Ghana, handed over a number of congregations in the Buemkrachi area to the EP Church. So in 1954, these churches resented being called Ewe people because they are not Ewes. So they opted out and started a new church called the Presbyterian Evangelical Church of Buemkrati. The Presbyterian Church of Ghana and the EP Church, or the Presbyterian Church, were not in favor. So they had a meeting, they formed a committee under the leadership of the two moderators of these two churches, Right Reverend Galavo for the EP Church and Right Reverend Ojija from the PCG, or the Presbyterian Church of Ghana. This committee recommended and advised that the Presbyterian Church adopt a new name using evangelical in place of the Ewe. So in 1954, a synod was held at Kpeje, and this synod decided that the church should adopt this new name. So that is why the church became Evangelical Presbyterian Church.
Meanwhile, the Germans returned to the Gold Coast after the First World War and worked with the African leaders until the Second World War broke out, when they had to leave again. It is said that Reverend Paul Vigrebe, the last missionary to leave during the Second World War, was arrested by British soldiers at this building, which used to be the missionary office at Akpafutoji, and while being escorted away, met the EP school children who were singing Ewe hymn 358, which he later referred to in an account as prophetic. The Bremen Mission and other organizations continued to support the EP Church for years, and the church had grown by leaps and bounds.
The missionaries did not neglect what they started, even though they were not here in person. The records indicated that they were with the church in spirit. After the German missionaries left, the government of Ghana invited the Scottish Mission to take over the supervisory work of the orphan church in the Anglophone territory. So the Church of Scotland took over. Immediately the dust of the First World War settled, the Bremen missionaries returned to continue helping in their work. One of them was Reverend Beveridge, and others that followed were Herman Schuster and Paul Vigrebe.
Other forms of support were also provided in the areas of finance, human resource, and material. For instance, the United Church Board for World Missionaries in America sent a team led by Reverend Eugene Grau. It was Mrs. Grau who started the Women Bible class for the training of women in the church. By 1947, the church membership was over 46,000. The church had 325 schools, 2 hospitals, one at Rara and the other at Adidome, agricultural stations at Bimbila, Yendi, and Chiraponi. Under the leadership of Reverend Beveridge, the church started a teacher training college at Amejepe.
One other great achievement was the EP Church came into partnership with the Methodist Church and the Presbyterian Church of Ghana to establish a pastoral training school called the Trinity College, which is now Trinity Theological Seminary. This seminary was established in 1942, started in Kumasi and later moved to Accra, where it is now. The church started a number of schools. The Mauli School in Ho, the EP Secondary School at Hohoi, and technical and vocational schools at strategic places. These are some of the achievements of the church. By the time they celebrated its 100 years and thereafter.
The church also made way for the training of women in ministry. The first two were Reverend Bertha Ayele Dovlo and Reverend Felicia Anyagle Mensah Dade, popularly called Fam Dade, who later became the first national coordinator of the women's ministry for the EP Church of Ghana. Till 1980, the church enjoyed absolute peace. In retrospect, however, it is said that laxity and syncretism had set in generally in the life of the EP Church.
The church life in the 60s, 80s had become nominal in that people would go to church for going to church sake, be members of the church, and be proud that if they die, they will be buried by Christians, because the Christian burial became attractive more than the pagan worship. But underneath, most people who call themselves Christians would consult fetishes. Some would participate with the pagans in the pagan activities. They will celebrate festivals with them and perform every customary rite, whether Christian or not. Even the preaching of the word was not preaching Christ again. It became storytelling.
It has been gathered that many members of the church at this time were attracted to somewhat more spiritual churches. Many schisms in the church which led to the founding of churches such as the Apostles' Revelation Society, the White Cross Society, the Lord's Pentecostal Church, and Christ Evangelical Mission are said to have taken off around this period.
Members of the church found it strange to be in the church and to be confronted with certain spiritual issues, and the church was not able to rescue them. So many members were in the church and also taking part in traditional spiritual matters outside the church. That was the gap which the Bible study and prayer fellowship came to fill.
At this point in the life of the church in Ghana, what was happening in the EP Church was widespread. It was lukewarmness in all the churches in Ghana. But God, doing his own good work, at this time there were revivals in the campuses mostly brought in by Scripture Union teachings in the young men and the Christian teachers at the campuses, the university campuses. And organizations were formed to go for evangelistic missions in towns. Some of us who come from the Volta region, who were members of the Christian fellowships in the campuses, the University of Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, and some other campuses decided to form Volta Evangelistic Association and go to the Volta region and preach to our own people.
Togbe Christopher Gebu-Mensah was a member of the Volta Evangelistic Association, a non-denominational organization headquartered in Accra. The founding fathers were Ralph Keteku, George Kom, Victor Otitiaku, Victor Odo, Wilson Awaso, Yao Fiagbe, Chris Bonredi, Solomon Avotri, Mauli Goka, and Nelson Nyako.
We were mostly involved in evangelistic associations, spreading the word of God from village to village, town to town in the Volta region. And we were also planting churches at that time because we saw the need to make more disciples for Christ.
We found out that the EP Church was a dominant Protestant church in the Volta region. So our activities concentrated mostly in the EP Church. And we started with the Volta, what we call VIA, in the churches in the Volta region.
At the same time, there was a wave of prayer and power demonstrations among other groupings in the country, including the Bible Study and Prayer Group.
And these two groups also started working together, VIA and the Bible Study and Prayer Group, because we were all members of the church, particularly the EP Church, and also members in the two groups. So we worked together as a team to revive the EP Church.
While VIA worked to revive spirituality in the life of members, the Bible Study and Prayer Group was also emerging through a revival that was started in Kumasi Amekum EP Church. The founding fathers of the Bible Study and Prayer Group were Messias GFK Akwai, WK Do Bojikoklo, LK Blame, CY Adinkra, and Madame Constancia Ahovi.
The church had grown cold at the time, and many were hungry for spiritual encounter. So a few people who felt concerned thought that it was good to remember how the church started, come together and pray and ask the Lord to deepen their spiritual life and experience. That led to the formation of the group, which started as a localized group, essentially at Meko. I'm aware that there were isolated ones elsewhere happening at the same time, but the strong one at the time was the Ameko group, where a group of Christians, elders got together and formed the group. They became energized through the encounter with their colleagues, the Scripture Union, Interhall, Christian Fellowship background from the universities who were members of the church at the time. So when they joined, the activity became heightened and it grew quite tremendously, and especially their prayer activities where they were helping in deliverance processes. So it even was serving as an avenue for evangelization for the church. Eventually, in 1978, inaugurated the group formally acceptable wing of the church at Baki. So that gave way for all congregations to also take steps to encourage the group at their stations.
It is on record that the acceptance of the group helped in halting the drift of members to spiritual churches. According to Dr. Victor Kudu, the Bible Study and Prayer Group was a formidable group with well-demarcated structures. Its aim was to help the EP Church harness the giftings in members and grow the Church of the Lord. However, the outcome of what came to be a struggle for what was right in the sight of the Lord shows that God looked ahead and would not allow the work of the pioneers to be wiped off.
Well, the activities of the group mainly concentrated on a study of the Bible and the practice of what it says, especially prayer, fasting, and so on. But when our colleagues from the universities joined in, they intensified the lifting the knowledge level of the people. Every January we had a leadership training, so we trained people, and when we are training the people, we normally open the door. All the groups within the church, not only the prayer group, CYB, and we allow them to bring their leaders so that we train them.
The church before this period had been led by the following moderators and synod clerks: Very Reverends Andreas Aku, David Bensa, E. Awuma, B.S. Amegashi, M.W. Akama, E.K. Galavo, A.K. Abutiate, and C.K. Dovlo. For synod clerks, Reverend P.S. Kwame, Reverend C.G. Baita, Professor Emeritus, Reverend G.K. Ampofo, Reverend F.R. Ametowobla, Reverend F.H. Buachi, Reverend E.Y. Forsing, and Reverend A.Y. Wurapa. The 1931 Constitution for the EP Church in Ghana and Togo was revised and was to be adopted by the 13th Joint Synod of 1975 held in Ho from August 23 to 27, to be tried for 3 years. It was to be adopted in 1978. However, due to border closures between Ghana and Togo at the time, the Joint Synod to give approval for the printing of the document could not come off. It was finally published in 1979 and had since been the only valid constitution within the church till the election of Reverend Professor Jobo in 1980. Who was Reverend Professor Noah Komla Jobo, and how did he become the head of the church?
The EP Church entered into partnership with United Church of Christ, Board of World Ministries, they decided to train 2 pastors for the church. So they recommended him and also Reverend to go to the States to attend seminary. So they came back in the early 60s and they were ordained as Reverend ministers. So he had the chance of going back to University of Edinburgh for his PhD degree. When he came back, he started teaching at Cape Coast University. Apart from lecturing, he was given an oversight duty for our church in Cape Coast, Sekandi, Takoradi areas. In the early 70s, the churches of the Christian Council, they were dialoguing about forming a union. In the Republic of Zambia by then, when they became an independent country, they brought all the churches together and named it United Church of Christ in Zambia. So all the Pentecostal churches and the Orthodox churches were all brought together under one umbrella. The church in Zambia was run like an Episcopal church. That means they have bishops for the various dioceses. So the Christian Council of Ghana also thought of doing same, and the idea was mooted by then Reverend Professor C.J. Baita. The very Reverend Dovlo, during our pastors' meeting in 1980, he informed us that he will be going on retirement by 31st December, that's 1980. And he explained to us the modalities for the union. And he said we should elect a moderator that is marketable among the other Uniting churches in the Volta region. There was a long debate among the pastors that since Reverend C.K. Dovlo was a member of the council which deliberated on the church union. Since 1972, he was a member till that 1980. He knows a lot about the union, so he should lead them into the union. Although his term of office is ending, but he stood his ground and said no, constitution is constitution. The young pastors met and they came up with the idea that we should nominate Professor Jobo, and being university done, all the pastors would gather for the election of the bishop of the United Churches. They would consider him as the most qualified to hold the post. At that period of voting, the nomination was by secret ballot, and 3 names came up: Jobo, Dovlo, and Wurapa. So that was the most embarrassing thing for C.K. Dovlo, because I was there. He was emphatic that he doesn't want to go again, but his name came up. He just decided to keep quiet because he knows that it is illegal to stand again. So it stood like that. The 3 nominees were accepted. by the pastors and spouses. One thing which happened was that during the 1980 synods of all the uniting churches, they reneged on their decision to continue with the union.
Reverend Professor N.K. Jobo was inducted into office in January 1981, and he took over as the 9th indigenous moderator of the EP Church.
Some of us were very happy because we felt here is an intellectual, somebody who is a professor teaching in the university and is a Christian. That was our belief. So we were full of hope that he will bring some dimension of progress in the church.
He was full of physical development projects, emphasizing community development and education. His administration instituted a number of social interventions that were highly appreciated by members and pastors in general.
He engaged in a lot of social intervention, support people, especially those in the deprived area. There was hunger around those days, and he was able to raise resources to support those people. He also promoted music, especially our traditional Voltairean music. He even formed a group known as Jobo, or who is the ambassador choir of the church. And they promoted a lot of traditional music, like Ziggy, Adavu, Bobobo, Agbaja, and all those things. That resonated with us at the time.
Being an educationist, he was able to ground the church by helping establish some schools. We have the Malco Girls Secondary School as an example. I was then in Mali when he started it, and it's a positive thing that he has done. So we appreciate, and we have other schools for the church in the north. Recently I went to Saboba and I saw one of the EP secondary schools there over there. So there are things that he did to help the church.
He helped train pastors to acquire higher education. He started Malco Secondary School, Saboba Secondary School, Alavanyo Trade Center. So he brought a lot of educational activities into the church. Apart from training pastors, he was somebody who wanted people to have education. And so he set up at least 3 schools at his time.
Reverend Dr. Francis Fred Kobla Abuchi was the youth director of the EP Church and worked closely with Right Reverend Professor Jobo at the church's head office in Ho.
He took office and with lofty ideas about transforming the church. He was very critical about a lot of things. To him, the way they were leading the church was somehow mediocre. So he's the right guy to put things in order.
The Evangelical Presbyterian Church holds the Apostles' Creed as its basis of faith. Meanwhile, the teachings of the moderator were based on a doctrine he was introducing to the church through the pastors gradually. This was generally referred to as the Melagbe theology.
In 1984, the 4 partner churches in Germany and Église Presbyterienne Evangelique du Togo and EP Church Ghana, they wanted to go into a theological dialogue. So they invited him to be the main speaker, and that's where he launched his Malagbe theology. He calls it affirmative African Christian theology. And according to him, as Evers, we affirm life that can be seen in our names, like Agbako, Agbapavi, Agbanyefia, Agbanyaga, the rest. That means we are life affirming. And that is why when we wake up, you meet somebody, you ask the one, Alagbea. That means, are you alive? So we are life affirming. So that was the basis of this anti-Christ theology he propounded.
According to Reverend Professor Jobo, God meant Se, and people called Seshi were married to God and should not be troubled to get converted.
So he was also saying that one day he went to a conference in Cotonou, and in one of the villages they toured, he saw a lot of buildings with snake drawn on them, with the scale underneath. So they told him they are Dankpo, the snake shrines. And so they told him that every year the snake sheds of its scale. And so he took the idea and propounded that the snake says Mafonhe. That means when it sheds off its scale, it means rejuvenation. So we as Africans, we rejuvenate all the time through our practices, customs, traditions, and the rest. So he drew two emblems, one a cross intertwined with Jenyami symbol. That is Malagbe symbol. And the second symbol, a cross with a snake on it, with its tail going back to its mouth. And underneath is written Mafonhe. So these are the two symbols of Malagbe theology. And he presented this as an academic or a critical thinking, something by a professor. I'll put it that way.
The Malagbe theology and other actions of Reverend Professor Jobo were offensive to many members of the church and affiliates of the Volta Evangelistic Association and the Bible Study and Prayer Group. The following are separate accounts regarding Right Reverend Professor Jobo's teachings on the Malagbe theology.
One of the person who was very much against this teaching or criticism of Malagbe theology was Reverend Obed Agbo, the father of Victor, Reverend Victor Agbo. He was very much against it. By the time he was the pastor at Zoji district. So they called him to the head office in Ho and actually blasted him. He was an old man. He was about 60 years of age. And that old man, because he didn't see eye to eye with Reverend Jobo on his teachings on Malagbe theology, he was transferred to Togome, a very remote village near Juapon. That was one of the wicked things that he could do.
I must confess that I left his inauguration confused, because Professor Jobo assumed that if you understood English, you didn't understand ever. I expected the ever to be the translation of what he had said in English. But he tried to introduce his Melagbe theology. So, for me, I left his induction thinking he was two personalities, and as if that was not enough, the way he treated the synod clerk. When the Right Reverend Jobo was the moderator, he used to travel to Germany with the synod clerk. The signatory to the foreign account was the synod clerk. But when Jobo took over as moderator, the first thing he did was he said the two tickets which were sent by the German missionaries were meant for him and his wife. And he instructed the synod clerk to give him an open check. Later on, he changed the signatory. So the moderator became the signatory to the accounts, which didn't fall in line with what I considered natural justice. I have nothing positive to think about him.
He told Toby further that they have formed a choir, Dumadafo, and they would like to carry a linguist staff, Chamiti. So that Chamiti or linguist will be in front of the drummers while they process, anytime they process, even to church and the rest, yes, they will carry this linguistic. And Toby after they ask him, Ineve, Tiamiti, Niatamu need swear, Niatamu what swear. Can you carry a linguist staff? And he said, yes, we can carry it. So later on, they took the Chamiti to the palace of Toby Apade for traditional blessing, what they call Uyuri, meaning they bless it in a way. And it came to a point during Synod Sundays, Dumadafo would lead the procession, and the female pastor will be holding a big Bible. She will not cover her top. She will leave the top of her body plain and carry the Bible. And then the one carrying the Chamiti or the linguist staff will be in front. So one of his Mau bedaglemaye dagbena wodola bena wonongonye bena wonongonye. So this is the processional hymn. Atam kaya na nongonye tiami tia na nongonye. So that means they hold the linguist staff and also the machete, specially designed for such purposes, will also be around.
It is said that in spite of the differences of opinion pertaining to the moderator's doctrines, some level of cordiality existed between Right Reverend Professor Jobo and the leadership of the Bible Study and Prayer Group. This is why, upon the moderator's return to Ghana from a meeting of the World Council of Churches, where a call was made to member churches to give attention to the Apostles' Creed, the moderator mandated the Bible Study and Prayer Group to prepare study outlines on the Creed to be used in the church. The executive complied and did it faithfully. So, what went wrong?
If you have an agenda and you don't believe he is promoting your cause, it will come to a point where it will show up. We were cordial. We thought we were part of the church. So anything we could do, if we create a platform like our conventions, it was a major sale. So we go and the senior clerk will collect their literature for us. We'll come and sell it, send the money to them. Because the amount of money we get on that convention alone, sometimes the whole year they haven't sold things to that level. And it went on for quite some time. People suddenly, as we said from the beginning, that the church has become cold, now suddenly find that the church isn't as cold as they have been liberated. The people from the fellowship, when they get encounters in their own homes, they are able on their own stand firm, pray to the Lord for things to happen, which they have never experienced. So naturally, it is the work of the Lord, and it is the Lord doing his own thing. We wouldn't have felt any jealousy, because I don't believe that any of the officers or the fellowship at the time was trying to usurp the authority of the church. We were just doing our work.
A year into the administration of Reverend Professor Jobo, Reverend G.K. Atimpo was appointed as the national coordinator for the Bible Study and Prayer Group, to be assisted by Reverend C.F.A. Gbedi. They were to streamline the activities of the group, among other things. It is noted in various accounts that around the same time, the church administration was growing averse to the practices of the prayer group, criticizing the group for its closeness to the Pentecostal movement. Among other things, Professor Jobo renamed the Bible Study and Prayer Group as Bible Study and Prayer Fellowship, saying the group was no longer meant for certain individuals but the total membership of the congregations.
When he came to office in January 1981, the first convention took place at Hohwe, and almost 10,000 delegates were present at Hohwe. And as moderator, he was invited to give an address at the convention. So when the convention was over and we came back, during the first meeting we have had, normally if he has something to say, then he would come to the staff morning devotion. And even when it is not his time to lead the devotion, he will come early and pick the Kakali Namiapamo or Light for Our Path. Then, if you are the one on the roster, you have to keep quiet and sit down and listen to him. The first comment he made was that Paul said, when I was a child, I think like a child, I behave like a child. But when I am grown, I do things like an adult. And he said some of the dancing was so wild. And he said, Nyatonwe, Ukiarali Bonalo, Nyatonwe. So that means we have a great problem on our hand.
According to some pastors, Reverend Professor Jobo feared that Dr. Nathan Soji was gaining too much popularity among the members of the church, as some saw him as the moderator of the church.
I think in '82, during our pastor's meeting, he said, now the pastors should take over the teachings and the leadership of the group, and since it is a group, a lot of people don't want to join a group. So if it's a fellowship, then it's a fellowship you can go as and when you want to. So since it's a group, you have to register and be a member. So he mooted the idea that the name should be changed to Bible Study and Prayer Fellowship, so that pastors will take over and run the group. It shouldn't stay in the hands of the laity.
His administration also invited Professor Donald G. Thau, a professor of systematic theology at the Union Theological Seminary in Richmond, Virginia, USA.
Professor Thau was a professor in the Union Theological Seminary in America, Richmond, Virginia. That seminary was a seminary which was training students from EP Church and Presbyterian Church of Ghana. Professor Thau coming from the Union Theological Seminary to the EP Church. Before he came, the EP Church didn't like Dr. Soji because he was leading the Bible study and prayer group at the time. And the Bible study and prayer group became a force to reckon with. So they were finding a way to stop them. And the only way they could do that was to start with the president. And that was Dr. Soji. Jobo was doing many things. One of them was the Melagbe theology. Other things were financial malpractices and other things. So upon that, we said that we are not going to sit down for Jobo to be excommunicating people one by one until he destroyed the group.
In 1983, the moderator caused the reprinting of the church's constitution, which was printed earlier in 1979. The Bible Study and Prayer Fellowship, as part of its usual practices, decided to study the reprinted constitution thoroughly and noticed amendments in Articles 29, 30, and 37 of the 1979 Constitution. The amendment was to allow the moderator and the synod clerk to remain in office as long as they were capable. Some inactions on the part of the moderator caused divisions at various levels of church life.
There were divisions in the pastors' front, but to be frank, most of the pastors were not for him, but they remained quiet, they could not speak. Some few people were for him, they were very vocal. Those of us who were also against him were vocal. I could remember there was a time we went to pastor association meeting. If you were not for him, they would not even allow you to speak at the pastor association meeting. Reverend Dumevi raised his hand to speak at the meeting. And Reverend Asamoah, the interchurch, shut him down. He said, "Sit down there." And Reverend Dumevi sat down. Then I stood up. I said, "Reverend Dumevi, stand up and speak." I stood there. I said, if did not speak, the meeting will not go on. I was standing. Everybody was looking at me. They couldn't believe that I could do that. Very young in the ministry. So Reverend Dumevi stood up and talked his mind before I sat down. Whenever some of us young people who were bold, when we talk at the meeting and we had break, the elderly people will come and shake you and say, "Hey, we are behind you. Who are ahead? We are behind you. We are behind." But they cannot talk. They rather who were older people. "We are behind you." So we know we had people behind us.
Then, in 1988, news spread that the moderator had declared his intention to stand for a third term as moderator. This drove some individuals and groups to protest against his intention.
There came to a point where there was a rumor going around that Jobo is going for the third term. When the Constitution tells us he must go there for 2 terms and another moderator will come. I was a leader in the Bible Study and Prayer Fellowship in Mamprobi, and we discussed this rumor. That was said, no, we must stop him from doing that. So we decided to meet, pray, and talk about that message, that Jobo was going for a third term. That was where we started meeting at Combs' office. From Combs' office, then we came to the Junior Judge Combs' office to meet and discuss the rumor that Jobo is going for a third term, when the Constitution does not say that. And more so, it said that as far as he's alive, he remains a moderator.
Sometime in June 1988, Mr. James Agbeblo, who was the president for Volta Evangelistic Association, called me. So when I went there, he then said there was a group in our church in Kumasi, the EP Church, were trying to organize a demonstration. So they asked Accra people and members of the church in Accra to participate in. So he also told me late Albert Fiajikpe will be coming to his office that afternoon, so we could wait for him. So when he came, he knew about the issues already. So as a result of the discussion, we then said, and I suggested that, okay, because Ghana Presby was having problem at the time with leadership, and then at the very time to Methodist Church were in court because their president, Reverend Stephen, was also in court because he said that he had not served the number of years he was supposed to serve before they were trying to push him. So he was in court. So when I started, then I said that because of these problems in the Christendom, it was not advisable for us to go on that line. And it would be like washing your battle in the public for everybody to see. And then I said, oh, couldn't we resolve it? And then they mentioned a number of attempts they made to resolve, but it wasn't successful. But then we decided that maybe we should try another chance. If it's possible, we might listen. So with Fiajikpe then said that EP Church has a Accra office in Kuku Hill. So we drove to Kuku Hill, and then the keeper there put us through to moderator because he wanted to book appointment to meet him in his office at home. He said that he was prepared to meet us, but he had a scheduled meeting in Accra. So if we could rather meet him in Accra, and then he gave us the venue and the date he'll be in Accra. So we agreed, and then we organized ourselves and met him. We discussed 3 things with him, mainly the constitutional issue, that there were some changes in the constitution which everybody says that they were not aware of. His predecessor, Reverend CKW, said that he did not make that change before he left office in 1980.
The period of tension dragged on as the crisis deepened with the advent of the Revolutionary Guard, which became known as consent members in 1988. Reverend Professor Fuga explains how he became a consent member and the steps they took to resolve their concerns.
In 1987, there was some disagreement over some clauses which were introduced in the Constitution illegally. And so that matter was simmering and people were talking about it. I think attempts were made during those days. In 1984 by the pastors, in 1985 by some of the presbyteries, West Volta Presbytery, which had its headquarters in Accra, the Southern Presbytery. Attempts were made to have those discrepancies resolved in the Constitution. But it looks like at that time, it was not possible to do it because the moderator at that time was powerful and nobody could have his way. And so the matter was becoming heated. And because the church itself was so politicized, some people decided in Accra that the matter must be taken. Somebody must, go to Jobo and find out exactly what was happening and to get him to explain these constitutional discrepancies and problems. The Accra people decided to send a message to Kumasi so that somebody could come from Kumasi to represent Kumasi and the brethren here to go and talk to Jobo and find out from him some of these problems and grievances.
Dr. Victor Kodo, the president of the group, conferred with Mr. Edem Tete, now Very Reverend Dr. Edem Tete, who invited Professor Frank Fuga to represent the Kumasi area.
It was an urgent call. You didn't have to think a lot. You just have to decide and say, yes, I will go. I must add also that Mr. Ayeramachu from Kumasi joined me later. 14 of us met Professor Jobo at that time. And we discussed a number of issues. We talked about the Constitution, we talked about the financial issues of the church, we talked about tribalism, we talked about lack of transparency, a number of things. That the most important reason we met him was about the Constitution. James Agbebile was our spokesperson. The lawyer who was representing us at that time was lawyer Fiajigbe. He was the lawyer.
It is said that at the meeting with the concerned members, Reverend Professor Jobo insisted that the Constitution had been amended and that he did not have the capacity to constitute an independent body to verify whether the Constitution had been amended or not.
We left the meeting not very happy with the answers we got. And quickly we met immediately after that meeting to plan what the next steps were going to be. We said two things would happen. First of all, we need to demonstrate in Ho, because all along everything was indoor. A number of people didn't know what was happening, and the church needed to know that the Constitution was forged. His election for a third term was illegal, and the only way to do that was to make it public.
Issues of Bible study, issues of Constitution, issues of other divisions culminated into we have the Revolutionary Guards presenting a position, a resolution to him at home, and it was a demonstration. So that was the last straw that broke the camel's back.
Following the demonstration, a pastoral letter was circulated among all congregations of the church on the excommunication of Dr. N.D. Soji. The church leadership planned to suspend the constitution of the Bible Study and Prayer Fellowship and to dissolve its national executive, among other things.
The Senior Committee Executive, which was led by Reverend Professor Jobo, met Professor Dawes to say something against the Bible Study and Prayer Group and Dr. Soji. Professor Dawes didn't know Soji anyway, but he gave us instruction that Soji was teaching something contrary to the teachings of the church, so he should be excommunicated. They did it as if it was not Jobo who was doing it. It was that foreigner who instructed. Unfortunately for them, by then my late wife was working at the head office of EP Church. So he went very early in the morning to print some questions for Mauko Secondary School. She saw the letter, which was written by Professor Dawes that Dr. Soji should be excommunicated. So he brought the letter to me, and I took the letter to Dr. Soji. Then, in fact, that letter was discussed. Bible study and prayer group leaders meeting that was held that year in Sogankope. It was upon that later when the people who called concerned members decided to go to court, led by Mr. Agbebelo. That later actually prompted everything.
However, that year, the fellowship defied all directives from the church administration and went ahead to celebrate its 10th anniversary, which was attended by members numbering more than 10,000 at Angloga in the Volta region. Earlier, members had been warned in a pastoral letter of being sanctioned if they participated in the 10th anniversary of the Bible Study and Prayer Fellowship. Many forms of persecution were meted out to members of the church who defied the orders of the moderator. Madame Yaira Banini shares an experience of what happened at Amekum the Sunday following the Angloga event of the Bible Study and Prayer Fellowship.
Actually, the Bible Study and Prayer Fellowship celebrated its 10th anniversary. And it was after the 10th anniversary that the moderator, Reverend Jobo, excommunicated the leadership of the Bible Study and Prayer Fellowship. And that was something that was brewing some kind of tension in the church. There was a time, though we have administrators of the church, the pastor, the catechists, and session members in the church, they started bringing people from outside who were not part of the liturgy that was planned for the church. Though we have people on the roster to preach to us, we will come to church and then meet strangers from outside who actually didn't even inform the session that they were coming. So for 3 consecutive weeks we had that. They come deeply in the night, and then on Sunday when we gather as a church to listen to the word of God and worship, we will see them around. I could remember one time Dr. Kodo was supposed to preach, and then when it was time, he got into the pulpit to preach, and then we saw that they were also struggling to preach. So somehow we agree with Dr. Kodo that since he is on the roster, he should preach. So he went ahead and preached. After he preached, one of the people who came from Ho, the head office, also came and preached. I mean, we didn't understand because it was confusing, but we managed to go through. But that particular day, after the church service, the leadership of the church, they met briefly and then decided that if that be the case, those who want to be with the Bible Study and Prayer Fellowship should come to church early in the morning, and then those who do want to be with the Bible studies will also come later in the day. It was a very sad day.
Meanwhile, a faction was emerging in support of the Jobo camp. They were called Defenders of the Faith, made up of the clergy and the laity. Their main aim was to ensure that Reverend Professor Jobo remained in office to complete the 3rd term as moderator.
Well, the Defenders of the Faith were pro-Jobo people who wanted to support him or were supporting him no matter what. So they were determined to disrupt, to cause confusion in whatever the concerned members were doing. So they targeted individuals, targeted groups to cause trouble. They wrote letters, the police wrote letters to Anijage committee and so on, just to support the cause of Jobo. They stood very firmly behind Jobo.
The concerned members decided to take legal action against Reverend Professor Jobo and his colleagues, since they would not heed their call to have the matter resolved amicably.
It was not our aim to go to court. The demonstration took place before the synod, which was going to induct Reverend Jobo or formally accept Reverend Jobo as a moderator for the EP Church for the 3rd time. So we were hoping that when the demonstration came on, somebody would come and say, let's talk, and perhaps conclude that his election was not legal. So let's redo it again, if that was going to be possible. Nothing like that happened. All that we saw or heard was that the synod was going to come on, even after the demonstration, to formally accept him as the moderator for the third time for the EP Church. And we didn't have any other recourse, so we decided to go to court.
The case was first lodged at the High Court in Accra by 6 of the concerned members: Mr. James Agbeblewo, Mr. Hope Yomekbe, Togbe Christopher Gebumensa, Mr. Frank Fuga, Mr. Wade Mfianyo Kwame Adraku, and Mr. Benjamin Komla Deborah. Their request was for the court to declare, among other things, the nomination and election of Reverend Professor Jobo as null and void.
A writ was issued by our lawyer, Mr. Ndifafa Kunyi. He issued the writ, and it was we filed it on the 14th of July, 1988. So that was what happened. So, and in it we asked for a number of things. Basically, a perpetual injunction against him not to take office, or not the synod not to endorse him.
Justice A.W. Dove, presiding over the High Court, granted the interim injunction pending the final hearing and determination of the substantive case.
The justice saw the case and imposed an injunction quickly on the synod. Okay. But then, of course, they did not have the opportunity to respond. We call that ex parte, So they came back from Ho to come and argue the case, that they had a genuine case. They can prove that the Constitution was properly amended and that they win if they go to court. So the injunction should be discharged. More so, they had already printed invitation letters. People are on their way from overseas for the synod. If the injunction was placed, it would be such an embarrassment to the whole church. So they pleaded with the court to discharge the injunction so the synod could come on. After all, after the synod, we had the whole period debate whether his election was valid or not. And the court agreed.
The defendants filed an application to have the interim order set aside, and this was granted on the 20th of July 1988 by the same court, presided over by Justice S.A. Brobe. The defendants argued that the 1979 Constitution, which limited the moderator's service tenure to 2 terms only, had been amended, and that the action was brought to embarrass the church, which had invited external partners to witness the 1988 synod. The church went ahead to endorse Reverend Professor Jobo's nomination for the 3rd term of service. After the endorsement by synod, the plaintiffs returned to the Accra High Court for the determination of the substantive suit. At this point, the synod committee appointed 6 high-ranking personalities of the church, chosen by the Pastors Association, to settle the matter out of court, but this attempt was not fruitful.
There were a few interventions to resolve the matter out of court. While the matter was still in the Accra High Court, the Pastors Association of the EP Church, at one of their meetings, appealed to some eminent members of the church to come and intervene in the matter.
They were Reverend Professor C.G. Baita, Emeritus, Reverend E.Y. Tewia, Reverend Professor G. Ansere, Mrs. Justice Annie Jage, Mr. Justice Waku, and Mr. C.K. Dewonu, IGP.
Anijage committee, let me put it that way, when they got the invitation, thought that the Pastors Association did not have any locus under the constitution of the church to appoint them. So they requested the Synod Committee to confirm the appointment by the pastors, which they did. Without confirmation, the committee met a number of times to resolve the matter. We provided the documents that are needed, or what the documents we had to show that the Constitution was not amended, as was being claimed by Jobo. You know, regardless of the observation and the conclusion that because he had already been elected and he had already started the first term, it will not be in the interest of the church to ask him to resign. It will be a disgrace to the church because his election had been announced to the whole world. The partner churches, you know, and so on, had known that he was the moderator. To go back and say that he was elected in error would not be good enough for the church. So they are recommending that he should just be allowed to continue.
The concerned members refused to accept the stand of the Anijage committee. They expected a compromise.
Why would you say that his resignation would cause a disgrace or anything to the church? No. As a Christian organization, I think we should set a good example. We should tell the world that we have made a mistake. It was an error. And so we are redoing the thing again. We thought that stance was not good enough. They were being persuaded by what people will say, not what God is saying, or what the Bible is saying. So we thought that was wrong, and we were not going to accept it.
The case was reverted to the Accra High Court, but was transferred to the Ho High Court at the instance of the defendants to save them time traveling long hours to Accra. The case continued at Ho High Court, and judgment was delivered on the 18th of December 1989.
The judge there was Justice Isaac Amwa. He was the judge who handled the case. Okay, on the 18th of December 1989, then he gave judgments for us. All the reliefs that we were asking for, then he granted them, and then he added the 50,000 cedis as cost. The defendants were EP Church as a first defendant, and then the Reverend Professor Jobo was the second defendant. We asked for a declaration that the purported amendment of the 1979 Constitution of the EP Church of Ghana is illegal and unconstitutional. And then we said it was void and of no effect. We also asked a declaration that the nomination and the selection of the second defendant as Reverend Professor Jobo by the clergy January 1988 also was a breach of the Constitution. We wanted a declaration to that effect. Third one is that we wanted a perpetual injunction to restrain the defendant from amending or changing or endorsing the purported amendment of the Constitution. Then the fourth one is a perpetual injunction to restrain the second defendant, Reverend Professor Jobo, from taking office or as a duly nominated and elected candidate for the endorsement of the Synod. As I said, this took place before the 1988 Synod. I think it was in August. So we wanted to prevent this. We wanted a perpetual injunction to restrain them. So that's what happened. Then the last one is the perpetual injunction to restrain the defendants from endorsing the second defendant as a duly nominated and selected candidate, which was in a clear and flagrant abuse of the constitution of the church. So these are the things we asked for. So the court granted all of them. They then appealed on the 21st December 1989.
The defendants, dissatisfied with the judgment, lodged an appeal in the Court of Appeal in Accra. On 22nd December 1989, he applied to the High Court in Ho to stay the execution of the judgment of 18th December, pending the hearing and determination of the appeal. Justice G.K. Akwa denied the application, saying Professor Jobo's continued stay in the office would inflame the already explosive situation in the church. He awarded 10,000 cedis cost for the plaintiffs.
The judgment was said that he was restrained from acting as the moderator of the church. So he applied for stay of execution. Vacation judge then was Justice George Akwa. The first move, he did not grant the stay of execution. The defendant again then went to the Court of Appeal and repeated the application before the Court of Appeal. They granted the stay for him.
Reverend Jobo repeated the application to stay the execution of judgment at the Court of Appeal in Accra. In a 2-1 split decision, the Court of Appeal granted the application. Soon after that, Reverend Jobo and his administration resumed their acts of intimidation.
So in between, Jobo then started issuing threats. Pastors were receiving letters, and then there was a threat on the clergy and the leadership of the Bible study and prayer group. So because of that, we had to go back to court again. That we issued a new writ at the whole High Court to restrain him from sacking or banning the Bible study and prayer group, and then also transferring pastors and then sacking, dismissing any pastor who was seen to be supporting the concerned member.
The following pastors were excommunicated: Reverend C.F.A. Bedi, Reverend Victor Emmanuel Optitiako, Reverend Emmanuel K. Bodre, Reverend William K. Senya, Reverend W.K. Amedeka, Reverend Gift K. Agama, Reverend G.F.K. Akwayi, and Reverend Francis F.K. Abuchi. The rest were Reverend G.N.K. Agbefem, Reverend Edward K. Amenyadu, Reverend Samuel K. Misroda, Reverend Samuel D. K. Dumavi, Reverend E. K. Boahene, Reverend Setowu K. Ofori, Reverend E. A. Atiase, Reverend M. V. Dobe, Reverend G. K. Agama, Reverend W. K. Senya, and Reverend F. A. M. Dade. 13 lay members were also excommunicated. They were Dr. Moses Adibo, Mrs. Comfort Gane, Mr. Dan Amlalo, Mrs. Bernice Abba, Mr. Vincent Chikuno, Dr. N.D. Suji, and Dr. O.K. Atobra. The rest were Mrs. Christine Doe, Dr. C.S.K. Boje, Mr. Adam Kokutete, Dr. Victor K. Bodo, Mr. Remel Adusraku, and Mr. W.K. Bojikoklo. The second defendant, Reverend Professor Jobo, filed a motion that the 1979 Constitution had not been promulgated by the EP Church and that the only valid constitution was the 1931 Constitution. The case was determined on the 23rd of May 1991.
May 1991, the Court of Appeal then gave judgment for Jobo. The effect of it was to say that the 1979 constitution that we're calling to be the valid constitution of the church was for trial. And it was to be tried for 3 years, from 1975 to 1978. Joint Synod was to meet again to endorse it. The late Reverend C.K. Dovulu then caused it to be printed and distributed. And then everybody was expecting that it would be approved the following year, that was 79. Unfortunately, there was no joint meeting at the time. And so the next one was in 1980. In 1980, Jobo was nominated by the Pastors Association, and then also, yes, waiting for Synod for the election in 1980. At the time, it was Reverend Jobo who was in chair. As I said, Reverend Jobo said that there was no change in the Constitution. So there was no change in the 1979 Constitution. So that was the Constitution which was read and upon which the Reverend Jobo was elected. That was 1979 Constitution. So the effect of the judgment of the Court of Appeal was that because there was no further action by the Joint Synod, and therefore it wasn't an approved Constitution. So it will mean, in effect, that it was 1931 Constitution, which was the last approved Constitution that was in force. To us, that Constitution was no more in use because the amendment process started in 1971. In 1975, Joint Synod had already agreed on all the articles and all the provisions of the Constitution in 1975. And it was meant for trial for 3 years. And it was actually being implemented by Ghana side. Ghana, that's the EP Church. Reverend Jobo was elected upon that Constitution. So when they came back to say that, when the Court of Appeal said that it wasn't a valid Constitution, okay, we couldn't then have to say that because the Constitution was being implemented was no more the valid one. In effect, we gave interpretation to say that, in effect, there was no Constitution in the church. Doesn't mean that the Constitution that you were implementing, suddenly there's a loophole or something, there's a problem with it. Therefore, it has to go back to 1931. We didn't accept it. That is why we said that we, the EP Church of Ghana or concerned members, then said that then the Constitution we have now in the 70, we initially were calling 75, 79 Constitution. In actual fact, we filed an appeal against it, but we did not pursue it. We didn't pursue it because at the time the split already occurred.
Now, was the split anticipated? Did it come as a shock to the whole administration at the time?
He did not anticipate that there would be a break in the church. He invited the Presbyterian Church of Ghana moderator, Right Reverend D.A. Corantin, to be the guest preacher for Synod. So after Synod, he sat with him and told him that he has a similar group in his church and they are able to handle them. They are helping the church to grow. So he should find ways and means of containing them. He shouldn't be antagonistic towards them. Since he has finished his mandatory for a second term, he shouldn't go for a third term. He should resign honorably. Also, the Bishop of Ketaho Diocese by then, His Lordship, Francis Lodom, also told him the same thing, that the EP Church is one of the uniting factors of Eves in the Volta region. So a break in the church means a break in many families. So he should consider stepping down. And he said categorically that if I, a bishop of whole diocese, and my people say they don't want me, what else can I do? I have to resign. He added, it's something I heard him say himself. Some of his mates, colleagues, professors also advised him. The chiefs also came into it. The Volta Regional House of Chiefs also came into the case and came with the same conclusion.
The Accra faction was the first to call a press conference to announce its next steps. Mr. Dan Amlalo was the declarant. He shares what happened that day.
The press conference was to explain the judgment to the members of the Bible Stadium Prayer Fellowship who were gathered at the time that yes, the ruling has been given. The judges have said this, but looking at things, these are the implications and this is what we want to do. So it was discussed and members accepted and said, yes, that's the right thing to do. Let's just declare ourselves as an autonomous church and hold ourselves, go by the word of God, meet, pray, and do everything. And we had pastors on our side. Some of them were excommunicated.
The group decided to quickly mobilize their members to keep them under another administration which they had decided to create. This decision was taken at the first press conference held at South La on the 23rd of May 1991.
Another administration to hold this group together. Because at the South La Declaration, we said the members should hold themselves as autonomous individual churches until further notice. So that's 2 weeks. The 8th June, then the Nungua Declaration, and us in that we're taking ourselves to become EP Church of Ghana, just in fulfillment of the declaration by the court that the church did not have a constitution, because the 79 constitution was the only valid constitution and there was no change. Therefore, if there was no change, then we did not have a moderator.
The retort from the church leadership at Ho was that Mr. Dan Amlalo, then the head of the Environmental Protection Agency, had no constitutional right to declare congregations as autonomous. 2 weeks later, the Accra faction called another press conference with Dr. Moses Adibo, then the Director of Medical Services under the Ministry of Health, as the declarant. He says he did not know he was making history at the time by declaring the start of a budding branch of the missionary work.
I wasn't privy to the first declaration that was made, but the reaction of the EP Church was that the person who addressed the press conference was a non-entity and a few disgruntled members, which angered me, because Dan Amlalo, even though he was young, he had risen to become the head of the EPA. And I very much respected him. And his interest in the church also impressed me.
For Dr. Moses Adibo, the concerned members thought he was not interested in the politics of the church, being a civil servant. But with the development, he approached the group himself.
So one day I approached Mr. Yomekwe and asked him how the concerned members financed the affairs. He told me it was on individual basis. So I took note, and the next time I met him, I gave him some amount. And that's how he made sure that he briefed me after every event.
Lawyer Richard there explains how what happened in the EP church was not a schism, but a split.
My understanding of the schism is that it's a breakaway or splinter group. Okay. But in this particular case, that was not what happened. What occurred was that in our reckoning, about 50% of the church members decided one way or the other. We realized that most of the congregations in Accra and Kumasi, most of them, at least the most active ones, okay, supported the cause of the concerned members. And then also in the Volta region, mainly in the southern part of it, a number of congregations have declared their autonomy for the concerned members. They wanted to be autonomous. That was our first call, was to ask all the congregations that believed that 1979 was the rightful constitution of the church. And then those who did not support the action of Reverend Pastor Jobo, they should declare autonomy. So we had a number of them. Mainly for the southern, almost all of them supported the EP Church of Ghana. In Greater Accra, a number of congregations also supported. And in Greater Accra, every congregation was affected. Every congregation. We did not move out, there was no split. There was in the Greater Accra. In Kumasi, number of them congregation also decided to support the cause of the concerned members.
It is important at this point to mention that Reverend Professor Jobo, in his parting speech delivered to the EP Church at the Trade Fair site in 1997, stated these words, "Mama Magbalam Dinami," meaning, "It is division I leave behind." The two churches began their engagement in reconciliation talks just after the split, at the instance of various bodies and some individuals.
As a matter of fact, when the split happened in 1991, the first group of people that made effort to reconcile the two factions, the Accra and the Home faction, were the Volta Region House of Chiefs. They took that step because they felt the church had a large following in the Volta region. So dividing at that time, they felt it was going to affect the region where that was allowed. So they made effort to quell the whole issue that started. However, that didn't seem to work. There were occasions, I remember, when they called meetings to talk together about the position at the time, but it was turned down by the very Reverend Professor Jobo. It was turned down. And so the chiefs were frustrated, so they stopped. Their efforts came in from the international as well as the national bodies.
The moderator of the Global Evangelical Church, Right Reverend Prosper Samuel Jomeku, relates some specific progress made towards uniting the churches.
Somewhere during the tenure of very Reverend Dr. E.K. Bodwe, Dr. Bodwe invited me to join a committee that was actually meeting over this whole issue of reconciliation. But even before then, I know that there were a number of efforts that people made, particularly Christian Council, Women Mission, and some individuals made a lot of attempts to bring the two churches together. But much of those meetings couldn't yield the expected result. So when I was brought into the picture, that time we had the late Professor Elon Dovlo, the late Mrs. Vivian Dodo, then Reverend F.M. Agbo, and myself. We were coming from there. And we had Reverend Dr. Fayose, the late Reverend Dr. Agidi, one Mr. Chapasu, and later Reverend Frank Anku, the former senior clerk of the church. All these people were coming together, and whenever we met, people thought we were one. You wouldn't notice that there was any problem between the two churches. We lived as brothers and sisters. And then later we brought on board Reverend Dr. John Futagbe and Mrs. Esibobobi. I think at a point in time we're trying to also bring in Mrs. Matilda Fiajigbe. Yes. So we were attending these meetings. We were making a lot of progress. And as I said earlier, we enjoyed our time of discussions. The earlier bitterness that was expressed between the two churches, you realize that we're no longer in that era. We are now sitting down together as brothers and sisters. And we all thought that such a moment should have happened earlier. But I want to put on record that greater part of our meetings and most of the things we did were facilitated by Reverend Dr. Setrinyomi, who was then the General Secretary working with the World Alliance of Reformed Churches. And he actually provided most of our logistics. And it was his dream, whatever he could do, to push us to continue the reconciliation talk.
The talks took them to the southern part of the Volta region, where the dream almost materialized. But for the legal action some members of the EP Church Ghana took against the leadership of their church a couple of years later, which have halted the exploratory efforts.
We later decided to take some of our meetings to the south, where we had a number of problems between the two churches. We had the Jerukope issue, we had the Keta, Agnoga, Akachi, but later the Akachi problem was solved. The chiefs and others came in, and then that problem was solved. Then, during our discussions, we realized that Global Evangelical Church was in majority when it comes to those who were in Dabala, for which reason they have taken over the Dabala chapel. But because we had in mind helping our EP brethren, we organized a program. There was a program between EP and Global Evangelical Church, and to raise funds, one, to create an awareness that these two churches are making moves to be one, to come together, and then also to raise funds to help our brothers from the EP side to also start a chapel. We did all that. Now we continued our reconciliation moves. So one day we went to Sogakope, and then we were having a meeting, but we realized that some of the utterances coming from some members of the EP didn't augur well for us to continue. And it was not long when those same people, some of those people, took their own leadership to court. We realized that, yes, initially, the two churches saw each other as enemies. But during our reconciliation talks, we challenged the committee members to appeal to our various synod committee executive, and the general assemblies that we should start inviting people from the other side to their various synod and general assemblies. Of course, because the leaders of various churches wanted this to happen, they actually started that, and we started attending each other's synod. We also realized that we started recognizing each other during funerals, weddings, because this whole issue is about one family. We are one people. So something happens, you see EP pastors there, global people are not comfortable to introduce them. You go to another meeting, you see Global Evangelical Church pastors and EP pastors were not comfortable to recognize them. But as a result of these discussions, our engagement, we realized that we have overcome such differences.
The split did not end the court cases. The whole administration went to court to restrain the EP Church of Ghana from using the name. In its judgment, the High Court sitting in Accra ruled in 2002 that the name of EP Church of Ghana should be changed to avoid confusion in the minds of the public. This forced the church to select a new name.
The church became Global Evangelical Church when the EP Church took the EP Church of Ghana to court to change the name. And finally, the court ruled against the EP Church of Ghana and asked us to change our name. And so the Synod Committee asked every presbytery to bring a name. And then presbyteries organized themselves, and then they selected a name. Each presbytery selected a name. And incidentally, when we came to the emergency synod, Accra selected Global Evangelical Church without any reference to each other. Kofrodua selected Global Evangelical Church. Then another third presbytery also selected Global Evangelical Church. So when every presbytery brought their names, all of us were asked to vote again on the name we should choose. When three presbyteries already brought the same name without referring to each other, you see that God is working. And so when the vote came, that name, Global Evangelical Church, stood that day. That is how we became Global Evangelical Church.
The split further ignited more court cases over church properties, especially as the two churches were no longer using the same name.
We had a lot of court cases which were instituted by EP Church Ghana. That's the whole administration. We had a Safla case where the Fiave, EP Church of Ghana.
Other congregations affected were Jelukope, Keta, Amakum, Atonsu, and Teshi.
The last court case was Teshi case, the Victory Chapel Teshi. The court decided against the Global Evangelical Church in January 2021. So we lost that case, although it's been in court since 1994, and it traveled these years. Okay, sometimes it was dormant, and then from time to time the EP Church will come back and then he will revive it and continue. But the final decision was given on, I think, 25th of January, 2021. So that was the end of it. But for the other cases, we lost most of them. Amakon was the first one to decide that we lost it, so we moved out. So we are now in the different premises. Keta and Jelokope, what happened was, I think in 1989, their lawyers wrote to us to say that they wanted to revive the case. So we went to court. I went to court. Our lawyer was Mr. Queenie. I went to court on 2 occasions and they never showed up. On the second occasion, I made an application that the case should be struck off for want of prosecution. So that was sort of done. So if they wanted to pursue it, fine, but they've not come back. We also do not intend to pursue it. One, because the Global Evangelical Church, they have got a new place, so we didn't see any need for us to pursue that particular line of action. For Anglican, the church supported them to put up a new chapel. So we moved out of the chapel. We debated it for some time. We looked at it, what is the implication of giving it to them? But we thought that in the interest of reconciliation, they will take it and then they'll give us the months. But after we handed over the chapel to them, they decided that they wanted the months in addition. So we encouraged the congregation that they should put up their own mansions and move out. So as far as concerned, the case is still pending. In the case of Akachi, the chiefs intervened and then the 2 parties sat down and then settled the matter. The chapel was given to Global Evangelical Church, and then Global Evangelical Church was to reciprocate by supporting them to have their own place. Dabala is not being withdrawn from the court as such, but there was another move to settle that particular case also. So generally the parties were in agreement that it is better to talk than to go to court to go and be fighting among ourselves. So we believe that Dabala is no more an issue unless they are coming to revive it. If they don't revive it, we have made a sufficient move from both sides to be able to reconcile.
Atonso and Obuasi cases are still pending at the Kumasi High Court. The moderator believes that with the successes chalked up with the reconciliation talks, the 2 churches would one day join hands to celebrate their reconciliation.
I want our brothers and sisters from the EP fraternity to know that we are one people. We are children of the same Father. We have a common root. And the EP people also recognize this. I must say that even during the celebration of the 175th anniversary, they invited us. They saw us to be part of them. So they invited us. And I represented the Global Evangelical Church in that meeting. If you take their calendar today, you realize that you will see my picture telling the whole world that Global and EP Church are one people. But it will not end there.
The establishment of the head office of the Global Evangelical Church was possible through the team effort of selfless members.
The spirit of volunteerism was great, very high. That is why all the people we knew, like Reverend Dr. Tete, who became a moderator, Reverend Prince Tepe, who became a senior clerk, Reverend Ati, who became a senior clerk, and Reverend Professor Fuga, they didn't turn our invitation, which we sent to them to be pastors, they didn't turn it down. They all wanted to come and help. And so it was like volunteering to help. And you see the Bible study and prayer group members were very resourceful. In all the villages were sending people there to preach. Because one of the questions that people kept on asking us is that, Can we have pastors in the villages? Can we have pastors?
That same year, the EP Church of Ghana, now Global Evangelical Church, began efforts to train its own pastors. These efforts led to the establishment of the Global Theological Seminary, which has so far trained pastors and lay leaders numbering more than 2,000.
So we saw that one of the greatest things that we could do to establish the church was to bring in many pastors. And that is what helped us. Then another thing was the first moderator didn't have a car because the head office didn't have money to buy a car for him. But the Saviour congregation, which was my congregation, we gave money out, and the Pastors Association also was tasked to give certain money. We collected all these monies and we brought it together to buy a car for the moderator. That was a great volunteering spirit. And people actually gave their wealth. The late Mr. Yomekwe, for example, gave his office to us as the first place where we had our Synod Committee executive meetings. Then afterwards, we moved to his house, free of charge. Mrs. Beatrice Avege donated her pickup to the head office to be used. And the place which we have now as our head office was actually volunteered by the late Mrs. Avege Agbo. She approached us, and through her, we purchased that place. And I can mention many, many more. Spirit of volunteerism, all the villages. Anytime we're coming to Synod, people will bring yam, people will bring maize, people will bring money, people will bring cow, free of charge to the Synod. Those things, we were not buying them. Food was coming without being asked. And that was another great, great help to the church at those formative years.
The year 1991 marked a remarkable turnaround in the EP Church as the two administrations held their separate 50th synods. The Accra faction ratified measures taken earlier in respect of the administration of the EP Church of Ghana. The first 36 pastors were commissioned at this synod. They joined the 17 excommunicated pastors to serve the church. The Global Evangelical Church has, in its efforts to build a united church, put in place measures to correct the anomalies that led to the split in the EP Church Ghana. One of these steps was to define an identity which sets out the church's basis of faith, among other things.
After the split, there was the need for us to have an identity so that we know what we are standing for. And also because of the many churches around. If we talk about the Global Evangelical Church, people should know, the members in the first place should know what we stand for, why we do what we do, our belief system, our core values, our heroes, our symbols, what they stand for. All these are embedded in the corporate identity. So it's actually a document that every leader in the Global Evangelical Church should study. And the corporate identity is based on the Bible. If you get to the core values, the Bible, prayer and fasting, mission, leadership, holiness, tithing, music, social action. If you put all these together, they are all biblical concepts, values, which we have carried. What stands in the middle of the core value is the Word of God. In the Global Evangelical Church, we preach the Word. We don't believe that a Christian must be poor. We are not prosperity gospel preachers. We preach holiness for people to stand for the Lord, to live holy lives, and do their work so that God will bless them. Ours is a holistic approach. Now, in the area of social action, we have done and we are doing several things. We have the Global Impact Foundation, a financial NGO, and this NGO helps the church. The church saves money, and their congregations save money there, and people draw monies that the congregation may not use for this moment is saved there. We also have the Empowerment Union. Years ago when we started, pastors would come to the head office and say, "Oh, please give me loan. I need money." Then we came out with the concept of the Empowerment Union so that people could save. Pastors could allow deductions from their salaries into their savings. It was replicated in the congregations where people saved. And so we have the Empowerment Union, and pastors, workers can just go and draw their money. It's a kind of bank.
Other social interventions the church is executing include the donation of wheelchairs to individuals and health institutions. The Gesam Educational Support Fund, GESU Fund, has also given out scholarships to needy but brilliant students.
Those who started it were our youth. They looked at what happened on campus, how some of their fellow students, girls, became victim to men, maybe sometimes because of just some few CDs. And so they said, we need a scholarship. So they took the initiative, the church saw into it and endorsed it. We are praying that the fund will grow so that for a year we can give scholarships to hundreds of people. And we give scholarships not only to the Global Evangelical Church members. Once in a while we give to others who don't belong to the Global Evangelical Church.
Has the Global Evangelical Church made any inroads in cross-border evangelism and church planting?
We have Global Evangelical Church, our foreign mission. We have about 35 congregations in Togo, and we have created a whole presbytery there. So we look at them as part of the church, and we pay them from here. Let me be explicit on that. Yes. We also have branches in the US, UK, Norway, in Africa, in Tanzania, and La Côte d'Ivoire. We have branches all over there.
The Global Evangelical Church continues to carry out development efforts through the benevolence of its committed membership.
When the split occurred, EP Church of Ghana, we had lots of challenges with finances. We still have challenges, yes, we need money. But financing the issues of the church, payment of salaries became a difficult thing. We took 10% of income from congregations. We went to 30%, then we went to 40%. Then finally, we started taking 70% of tithes. You know, tithes are part of our core values. So we teach on tithes and we take 70% of tithes. And from these tithes, we pay workers. As I speak now, we have 641 people we pay at the end of every month. Yes. Pastors, evangelists, retired pastors, because retired pastors retire on 70% of their income. We pay them, so 641. And it's a very big achievement. Few churches can do that.
The church also introduced the Congregational Infrastructural Development Program, CIDEP, which has enabled many congregations to pursue various projects.
Part of our financial strength comes in the area of what we call CIDEP. That's a Congregational Infrastructural Development Program. we have realized that a number of our congregations suffer in acquiring land, putting up their manses and chapels. So we came up with this program where a congregation contributes money on a yearly basis into a fund, which we are calling CDEP. And CDEP is hosted by GIF, Global Impact Foundation. So if you need money, for instance, when you have put up the structures and you need money for the roofing, which usually becomes a challenge to the congregations, you just apply to CDEP and then you take money. So far, 67 congregations have benefited from CDEP from the time that it was established till date. Buying pieces of land, roofing, putting up structures, chapels and manses. So it helps us. Because of the financial base that we were able to create, we've been able to buy assets, things that we need, like vehicles. Sometimes in my preaching I've been saying that till EP Church of Ghana came and Global, I did not know that a church could draw money from its own coffers to buy new vehicles. No, I never knew. Because the way I was brought up, I thought you could only take money from foreign donors, because then we were growing. It was Bremen Mission that gave us money and they gave us the vehicles. But I realized that as a church, once you are well mobilized, you can do all these things. So in a year, we have bought 3, 4, 5 vehicles as we need. We've bought new vehicles for our presbytery. Others that have not yet gotten theirs will get them theirs later. We were able to do these things because of the financial base. Yes, so for any church to grow, the finances are very much important.
Over the past 30 years, the Global Evangelical Church has seen steady progress under the leadership of the following moderators, synod clerks, and programs and interchurch relations secretaries. Very Reverend Edward Kojo Amenyedu, Commander Retired Ferdinand Hope Bewonyo, Reverend Dr. Emmanuel Komlak Bodwe, Reverend Dr. Edem Kokutete, Very Reverend Dr. Setowu Kojo Ofori. For synod clerks, Reverend Victor Emmanuel Otitiaku, Reverend Setowu Kojo Ofori, Reverend Prince Yawotepe, and Reverend Raphael Mark Kwesi Ati. For programs and interchurch relations secretaries, Reverend Commodore Philemon Frank Kwe, Reverend Francis Fred Kobla Abuchi, and Reverend Samuel Dixon Kofi Dumavi. Lay presbyters who have served on the Synod Committee Executive so far are Mrs. Comfort Gane, Mr. N.K. Obiri, Dr. Victor Kodu, and Mrs. Mabel Hehemeku. Others are Mrs. Samuel Aboga, Mrs. Charity Agbeblewu, Mrs. Enyonam Keteku, and Dr. Edward Agozi. The rest are Professor Mrs. Victoria Pearl Jugbefia, Professor Raymil Kwame Adosraku, and Mrs. Christine Bobobi. Mr. Francis Akoto, Mr. Kojo Mata, and Mr. S.E.S. Kuleke served as treasurers before the position was scrapped alongside that of the Programs and Interchurch Relations Secretary in 2011. In January 2022, the Global Evangelical Church inducted into office Right Reverend Prosper Samuel Jomeku, moderator, Reverend Dr. Johannes Ahiabu, the synod clerk, Mr. Ayram Achu, the male presbyter, and Mrs. Joyce Diodone Ahiabo, the female presbyter, on the synod committee executive.
the Lord Jesus Christ has come to reconcile us to God, and he has given us the ministry of reconciliation as observed by Apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 18 to 20, that having reconciled us, he has committed to us the ministry of reconciliation.
Thus the saying of Christ remains true: I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. Matthew 16:18.